Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here with you today. I want to share a reading from the poet Wisława Szymborska called Nothing's a Gift. Nothing's a gift. It's all on loan, and I'm drowning in debts up to my ears. I'll have to pay for myself with myself. Give up my life for my life. Here's how it's arranged. The heart can be repossessed, the liver too, and each single finger and toe. Too late to tear up the terms. My debts will be repaid, and I'll be fleeced, or more precisely, flayed. I move about the planet in a crush of other debtors. Some are saddled with the burden of paying off their wings. Others must, willy-nilly, account for every leaf. Every tissue in us lies on the debit side. Not a tentacle or tendril is for keeps. The inventory, infinitely detailed, implies we'll be left not just empty-handed, but handless, too. I can't remember where, when, and why I let someone open this account in my name. We'll call the protest against this the soul, and it's the only item not included on the list. Well, I do want to begin by thanking you all for having me again. This is the third summer I think I've been back to preach with you all, and it's always a joy to be here and a joy to work with folks like Ruth and Pete and everyone else who helps to put these beautiful summer services together. So thank you. I am going to begin with a little bit of congregational involvement. We're going to do a little call and response here to get started. And I promise you're going to know this one. We're not going to sing, we're just going to speak it. Ready? So I'll start, and you say the next line. Amazing grace. See, you knew what I was doing. That saved a wretch. I once was lost, was blind. Very good. It is one of the most ubiquitous songs in the American Songbook, Amazing Grace. We all know it by heart. We know it like we know the Happy Birthday to You song. It's so familiar and so beloved for many of us that my own mother, who is an ex-Catholic atheist, told me that she wants it sung at her funeral. We know this song deep inside us. We know it like we know Mary Had a Little Lamb, the Itsy Bitsy Spider, and yet it's a deeply religious song. It speaks to a very specific kind of religious and spiritual experience. It speaks to grace. Grace is sometimes thought of as a funny word for Unitarian Universalists to say. If you were raised in a Christian tradition, or if you're familiar with Christian theology, you know that grace is an idea that occupies a very central place in the Christian story. Grace is a key ingredient in what many Christians refer to as the atonement, which is the process by which Jesus' death on the cross offered a form of ransom for the sins of Christian believers, making any mistake that they made in their lives or any evil they may have committed available for redemption, and they themselves worthy of salvation despite that sin or that mistake. The idea of the grace of God in that system of belief is that it is too big for any of us to outrun. It's too strong for any of our mistakes or our evil acts to outweigh it. so long as we accept it. Now, for some of you, this may be a familiar story. You may have grown up with it. For some of you, this may be new. But whether it is new or familiar, you all know this song. You all can sing it by heart. We all can sing it by heart. So not all of us who know this song believe this particular story of Christian theology. Heck, I spent 3 years at an interreligious divinity school, so I can promise you not even all Christians believe this particular story of how everything works. Grace in this system of theology means something very specific. And yet grace in our popular, religious, and secular imagination in America has come to mean all kinds of things. We have grace notes, right? We have grace notes very good. We didn't even plan that. If you read music, if you're a musician, you know grace notes are the little decorative flourishes in a piece of music that often precede the beat. They are tiny. They are very quickly played, usually just 1 or 2 notes that come before the chord or before the main melody line kicks in. That doesn't sound like it has anything to do with Jesus on a cross, does it? No. There's also this idea in our world of someone gracing us with their presence, right? Or we talk about someone who carries themselves with grace, implying a certain kind of movement, elegance, or care, the way someone enters a room or engages in conversation. Again, Jesus, nowhere to be found. Finally, there's my personal favorite, because I still have student loans, the grace period. That is pretty amazing, though I wish it was longer. The grace period is a certain amount of time where an obligation of some kind is forgiven, but not forever. That one actually sort of starts to sound like Christian atonement theology, until you get to the whole time-limited part, and it kind of breaks down. So no wonder we're a bit confused about grace and what it means. When we look the word up in the dictionary, we find that it has this very similar collection of varied meanings. As a noun, it can mean both poise and elegance, or it can mean forgiveness or a blessing. As a verb, it gets a little more interesting. It means to honor or to bring beauty. To bring beauty. Now, there are lots of ways that we bring beauty into our world, and lots of ways that we can receive it as well. Beauty can be very practical. It was a thing of beauty in my life to learn that the grace period for my undergraduate student loans would kick in for a second time after the end of my graduate study. We can certainly show one another grace. The grace of a dancer creating a beautiful work of art in motion. The grace of a table, lovingly and charmingly set for a collection of close friends and family at the holidays. We have all these ways that we can bring beauty into our lives and each other's lives to show one another grace. But often the deepest show of grace, the kind that makes us really sit up and pay attention, the kind that is amazing, that inspires great music and theology, is the beauty that seems to arrive apart from all expectation. The beauty that goes far beyond social graces to grace us with its presence amidst circumstances of fear or anxiety or loneliness. It's the kind of grace that one of my favorite theologians, Monica Coleman, calls making a way out of no way. Finding a tremendous blessing that calls to us from beyond what seems possible in our world. A grace that is so amazing in our lives precisely because we do not and never could expect it. Last Sunday, at the WellSprings Congregation, where I serve as the Ministerial Intern, I preached a message that was inspired by a film, as we often do at WellSprings over the summer. We call it Spirit Flicks. As our lead minister, Ken Belden, likes to say, we're brushing right up against the limits of copyright infringement with Netflix. But we call it Spirit Flicks, finding meaning in the movies that we love. And last Sunday, I preached a message inspired by the Oscar-winning documentary 20 Feet from Stardom. Has anyone seen it? 20 Feet from yeah. It's a documentary that follows the story of about a half a dozen of the most prolific, talented singers of the last 50 years in pop and rock and R&B, none of whose names you are likely to know, none of whose faces you're likely to recognize. It's a documentary that follows the story of backup singers who have recorded on some of the most famous songs, hits, albums of the last 50 years of popular music. And in the film, we watch and we listen as these women, and they are mostly women, work together. We watch them in the recording studio as they create incredible music, intensely beautiful chords and harmonic lines. And as we hear their stories, we begin to see that despite this beautiful music they make, there's a wide range of variety in how these women experience their work. Some of the backup singers truly love what they do. Making this incredible music with other people is where they are meant to be. For them, it is exactly enough to fulfill them. But other women in this movie have heartbreaking stories. Stories of dreams that seemed tantalizingly close. Careers that never quite took off in the way that they hoped. Goals for themselves that never materialized. One of my favorite scenes in this movie tells the story of Darlene Love. Darlene Love was one of the first black singers to ever enter the white mainstream studios. And I'm not really exaggerating when I say she sings on every song you've ever heard of from the 1960s. She worked with producers throughout her career who cheated her, who exploited her gifts. Her voice was frequently dubbed over the images of other performers who were deemed more attractive or more marketable to mainstream audiences. Even when she finally got a solo contract signed, the terms were breached again and again, such that she was never allowed to truly control her voice. She was never allowed to own her career. Darlene Love talks about coming to this point in this career where she decided she couldn't take it anymore. And so she left it all behind. She quit the music industry. And when she left music, what she had loved doing for so many years, she fell into a deep depression. She says she couldn't sing anywhere except maybe in church. And to make ends meet, she started to clean houses for a living. She tells a story in the movie of one day near Christmas time. And she said she was cleaning this lady's bathroom, and the radio was on. And out of the corner of her mind, she started to hear her own voice on the radio, singing, "Christmas, baby, please come home." And as she heard her voice, she looks up. It's this tremendous scene in the movie. They zoom in on the radio. The music swells in the background. And she says, "You know what? It was at that moment I said, Darlene, this is not where you're supposed to be. This is not where you're supposed to be." The scene is amazing. And there's a grace in that scene that comes from the voice on the radio. The coincidence of that moment, right, beyond Darlene's control, that brings some remarkable beauty back into her life when it seemed lost. But there's also an amazing grace that's granted not just by fate or circumstance or coincidence, but also by herself. She's listening to herself. Darlene's story goes on from there. She does get back into the industry, and the documentary chronicles how her career takes off again, culminating with this triumphant and long-awaited induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But that's not what really mattered to me about that scene. What matters to me, and what I think should matter to all of us as Unitarian Universalists and as people of faith, is that she listened in that moment to her own heart. When this beautiful gift in the world comes to greet her, think about how different a scene we could have had if she were not willing to accept that gift. Right? This could have been a very sad scene in a different kind of movie. Think about how easily that could have been a scene of a has-been on her hands and knees in the bathroom, hearing her old song on the radio while she scrubs a toilet, just twisting that knife of disappointment of all her broken dreams deeper into her heart. But instead, we see a woman named Darlene on her hands and knees in a bathroom who experiences an inbreaking of grace, of beauty, in a circumstance where she might have felt there was no way out. She decides to trust her voice and what's in her soul. Grace can be a blessing and a forgiveness. It can be beauty and charm and elegance. But what's amazing about it is that in order for us to see it, grace needs to come from the inside and the outside at the same time. It is profoundly interdependent. It's a connected experience. We can see it in the outside world, but we also need to trust it and to trust that it's there for us. We cannot will our way to grace on our own, but we can also not find grace in the world without carrying some ourselves. Grace is that partnership that happens when beauty is being brought to us and we respond in kind. A couple months ago, there was a children's lesson about grace that a colleague of mine posted on Facebook for some reason. But I'm glad he did, because I read that children's lesson the first time and I was really confused by it. It gave me a lot to think about, and I've chewed on it since then. I want to share it with you all. It's an interactive story that's designed to be used in a Sunday school class or as a time for all ages story with the children in the service. And it says, gather all the children together and pull out a stack of play money, a stack of pretend $100 bills. Now hand out one $100 bill to each child and ask them, what would you do if someone knocked on your door one morning and handed you a $100 bill? No explanation, nothing you'd done to deserve it, nothing you could do to earn more. How would you feel? How would you feel? Good, probably, right? Maybe a little confused. The lesson says that the children might say things like happy, or grateful, or surprised. Now it says, hand out a second $100 bill to each child and explain the next morning the same person knocks on your door and hands you another $100 bill. This person must be crazy. But this keeps happening every morning. Every morning for weeks and weeks and weeks, a stranger knocks on your door, and when you open it up, puts $100 in your hand. What would you do? The lesson talks about things you can suggest to the children. Maybe there are things they would like to buy with the money. Maybe there are ways that they might save it for a future goal. Maybe they'd like to plan to give it away. You might have kids who get down to percentage allocations, right? Future accountants here. This much will go to my savings, this much will go to mom and dad, this much will go to the church. Now, the lesson says, one day, there's no knock. No one comes to deliver any money. You wait by the door all day, it's not there. And the next day, and the day after that. How do you feel now? How would you feel? Sad? Angry? Disappointed? Hurt? I know how I would feel. I'd be ticked. If I'd come to count on this $100 a day, I probably would have had big plans for it. I would have worked it into my budget at that point. When I place myself in this story, that $100 bill was a beautiful thing in my life. It was an impossible blessing. And I sat there and thought about this. I had no idea from what or where it was granted or why. And I had no idea what I could do to change the fact of its arrival or disappearance. Because I couldn't change either of those things. Lots of things in our lives are like this $100 bill. We feel joy when we're blessed with a beauty that comes from outside of ourselves. And we feel sadness when that beauty is taken away. But we feel despair or loneliness or hopelessness when we think that that beauty was taken away because of us, because of something we've done, something we could have controlled. Our sadness is very natural, but our hopelessness, our despair, these are things that can eat away at us, at the core of who we are. These are things that diminish our ability to trust our inherent worthiness. That inherent worthiness that our religious community as Unitarian Universalists tell us we can trust, always. To receive grace, we must be no one but ourselves. Because grace is not the gift itself, it's what we experience when we receive it. It's the reminder of our worth, of our worthiness, that breaks in amidst all kinds of circumstances, the easy and the elegant, and the difficult and heartbreaking. And while we may very naturally attach that feeling to one particular gift in our lives, the truth is the experience of grace is always there for us, around the corner. We may get attached to one way or another that it shows up, but it shows up in new ways all the time for all of us. Anywhere beauty is to be found or made, anywhere impossible love and forgiveness and honor is ready to be accepted. So grace can feel like a funny word for you to say. But really, grace is about knowing and seeing our first principle in action. It's about trusting that while we may make mistakes, and while we must be accountable and responsible to one another, there is nothing we can do to separate ourselves from love, from our inherent worth. And sometimes the best thing we can do is quiet our minds and listen for its song. Amen.